Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Developing Effective Performance Reviews for a Hybrid Workforce. We're just going to wait a few more minutes to see if we have another few joiners. Thank you for your patience. All right, I think we're good to get started. So today in our session, Developing Effective Performance Reviews for a Hybrid Workforce, we're going to cover how to gauge an employee's performance and productivity when you don't see them in person, how to run seamless 360-degree feedback review cycles between managers, peers, and direct reports, and how to deliver actionable feedback to dispersed teams. How can you empower growth, learning, and development without a physical office environment? And ways to optimize the performance process by setting clear, attainable goals for employees as part of their growth plan. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Bob. Bob is a modern, forward-thinking people management platform. It's a system of engagement designed to meet the unique needs of modern, mid-sized, and multinational businesses. It allows you to automate and scale HR processes, develop your people, and connect your teams to help your organization and your employees grow faster and stronger, no matter where they are located in the world. Our global team serves over 1,200 customers across more than 100 countries and collectively over 100,000 employees all over the world. And we truly feel fortunate to help drive and support employee happiness by delivering exceptional employee experiences. HR is in a fortunate position to strategically lead their businesses to adapt and thrive as remote and hybrid work becomes a normal way of operation. Through guiding and empowering managers to lead their teams, driving communication and engagement initiatives that build strong culture, and bringing strategic insights to light, HR leaders can directly impact the success of the business and solidify their standing as a strategic driver of business performance. In March of 2021, we conducted a global workplace study with the intention of understanding and evaluating the effects of the pandemic on people in the workplace. We surveyed 1,000 full-time employees that worked from January 2020 to April 2021 in order to understand the effect that the pandemic has had on their well-being and their performance and their work productivity. One of the questions we asked was, what do employees think hybrid work actually is? And the answer is, it means totally different things to totally different people, and being flexible is key here. When we asked, do the benefits of hybrid remote work outweigh the cons? 80% said yes. Hybrid is global and diverse, and it's our job to make sure we adapt and rise to this challenge. Your employees these days can be totally flexible in terms of contract, full-time, part-time, working fully remote and hybrid, and that's kind of a little bit of what we're going to cover today. Some of the challenges that have come up when it comes to performance reviews among our client base when it comes to hybrid work is video meetings are not ideal for performance conversation, especially when you have to have tough conversations. There's an imbalance between employees who come into the office regularly and those who don't. Remote employees don't seem to have the same networking, connection, and collaboration opportunities as on-site employees do. Remote workers may feel less connected to the company culture and feel less like part of the team and really have that buy-in and dedication to get things done. And then also the lack of communication between remote and on-site employees can lead to disparities, silos, and knowledge loss that can negatively impact and affect performance. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Our speakers, Gili Ben Yosef, consultant at Aya Lamy Consultants, Victoria Feldman, Senior Leadership Development Partner, Executive Coach at Amazon, and Adi Janowitz, VP Customer Success at Hybod. Thank you all for joining us today.
Candace, thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yes. So I thought we could go through and, we have some questions that have come in from our global customer base, and I thought we could go through and get your insights on these. So, Victoria, can you tell me what are the key differences between in-person and remote performance reviews?
Yeah. Well, first of all, before we talk about differences, I want to highlight what's in common between them is that performance reviews should not be just a one-off thing that happens in the end of the year or in the middle of the year. It has to be something ongoing. So in both of the cases, when we talk about remote performance reviews or in person, both have to be ongoing using some of the tools, whether it's via video chat or using some tools to capture feedback, 360 feedback from the stakeholders, the peers, the colleagues, the management, and maybe even the direct reports about the performance. The key differences is that when it's in person, of course, we have that impact that we can tap on somebody's shoulder, we can have a longer conversation, we can have a better report when we talk about body language. And these are things that are limiting when we talk about remote performance review, which makes it a little bit more challenging in these terms. However, I believe that both can be successful if done correctly. So if we say that somebody has a remote performance review and a peer has a in-person performance review, one is not going to be better than the other. It's up to the manager to find the right strategy, the right tools, the right ways, the right speech, the right language to use with their reports to conduct this performance review.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Do you have anything else to add? Adi or Billy, do you have anything else?
I just think that we have to keep in mind that there are, when we're giving a performance review, there's certain best practices in terms of how we communicate and using really specific, clear language, focusing on behaviors, things like that. And that's all the same, whether we're in person or remote. But sometimes when we are remote, we need to overemphasize these things, over communicate. We can't see body language as clearly. We can't, read some of the nonverbal cues. So really taking all the things we're trained on and we know when it comes to performance reviews and really, really overemphasizing them in those remote conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. I totally agree. And I'd like to add one thing that, to take into the equation, and that is the fact that with hybrid way of work, we also know a little less about the habits and the day-to-day of our employees, which adds another dimension to the assumptions that we're making or to the examples that we're providing through a performance review. And we need to take that into account as well, and potentially maybe ask colleagues or ask peers and so on, so that we can tap a little bit more into the day-to-day of our employees in order to make sure we have these examples at hand and it can really create a fruitful conversation with examples.
Thank you all. Another question that had come to us, what is the best way to implement a hybrid performance review process for a company that has never done this before? Where do we start? I mean, we could probably talk a little bit about this from a HiBob point of view, that we became hybrid very early. So being able to meet people in person when we can and do performance reviews for our peers and our, as a manager with our direct reports, when we can in person is hugely important. But maybe, Adi, you could speak a little bit more to that since you have experience there as well.
Yeah, sure. So we're actually running our performance review cycle just now, and it's been an amazing experience to drink our own Merlot again, and which we constantly do. And I think it's amazing just to look at the fact that 100% of the employees filled in their self-evaluation on time. And I think it goes a lot to say about the process we ran and how we use shout outs and communications and how we engaged our managers and our HR to make sure we are all embracing this process. And we've even branded it as high growth with the focus of seeing this as a way to help our employees grow.
Yeah, and I can add on to that. I think that regardless of whether your process is hybrid, in-person, or remote, what's really important is that baseline training and communication that you're giving to all your managers. We really want to make sure that they understand, how to have an effective conversation, how to focus on growth. We like to talk about feed forward, this idea of the feedback and the commentary we're giving our team members as truly focused on how can we learn from what we've done in the past and grow from it and develop, rather than thinking about what we've done not so well in the past. So when we're implementing a performance review process in whatever format, it's so important to make sure that our managers have the tools and the information that they need in order to do this. And going back to what Victoria said as well in the beginning, having everyone understand that remote versus in-person, no one is better than the other, right? We're all here to achieve that same goal and be able to develop a culture of growth and feedback in the organization.
Yeah, thank you, Adi. I definitely agree with you that there should be one of the best practices should be the aspect of manager training. So lots of managers, of course, I can talk about from my experience as a leadership development coach, is that lots of managers are promoted because they're doing a good job. And at some point, they find themselves managing a team of people that doing the same job they were doing before, and realizing that doing a good job and managing people are two completely different skill sets and completely different jobs. So it's really important that companies take that into consideration and empower managers to conduct effectively feedback for their direct reports. And it can be through training, through resources, through affinity groups, through mentorship. There's lots of ways of doing that, through coaching. There's different frameworks that they can use when they deliver the feedback. So it's definitely really important. Another thing that we need to take into consideration is that when we work in person, we can always have that aspect of, I ran into the hole. Listen, I have a little feedback about your last presentation. Can we talk about it one-on-one? So you have that aspect of spontaneity, of running in the hall, having a coffee chat. And this is something that we lose when we are in the remote work. So managers have to be intentional about how they deliver feedback and when they deliver feedback. And even though they cannot see their team in person, they have to make sure they have constant communication and constant ongoing feedback with their teams, implement weekly one-on-ones and use some of that time to deliver feedback if needed. And feedback is not only constructive, it can also be positive. It can be celebrating somebody's success. So also use that time to do that as well. And research showed also that transparency leads to engagement. So the more transparent the leaders are with people's performance, with where they're going, where they are in progress, as opposed to the company goals and objectives, the more employees feel engaged. So it's really important to take that also in consideration.
Thank you. Those are all great insights. I think biggest change for us has been, if you're going to be in the office when you're working hybrid, to try to make your best effort to meet the other people in the office at the same time. It's like totally changing your schedule some days, but it's so worth it to be able to capitalize on that since we're not here every day. Okay, another question that we have, how do you get your employees to successfully assess their own strengths and growth opportunities? I mean, I love talking about myself, but not everybody does. So how do you promote that within your organization?
So I can start here. I think that, one of the things we've been talking about, this culture of growth and feedback. And while our performance reviews are super important, we want to make sure that we have ongoing conversations about growth and development. So by making this a part of our routines, it becomes second nature to have these type of conversations and get our employees to think about these things. So whether you have your weekly one-on-ones and every week you have another powerful coaching question to ask your team members about, how do you use your strengths at work, or what areas of growth do you see for yourself? And just constantly having these really important conversations year round, week after week, month after month, will get into the mindset of your team that we're all about growth. It's an ongoing thing.
Do either of you have insights about this when it comes to self-assessment and setting goals?
Yeah, I want to build on that. Is that it all comes down to coaching, as well as how leaders coach their direct reports or their teams, and it can also be peer coaching as well. Is asking people powerful questions and enabling them to think instead of telling them what to do and telling them what they've done wrong or what they've done great. Asking them, how did you think the call went? How did you think the presentation went? What was your impressions? What did you think went well? What do you think are some of the opportunities? What do other people say about your presentation? And it really enables people think, empowers them to assess themselves and look at themselves in a critical way, but not in a bad critical way, but in a way of kind of assessing their own performance. And again, it should be not just once a year, but really in an ongoing manner, in weekly, monthly, or every time you need to talk about career conversations as well, where they want to grow. So it's for me, it's about coaching.
And I'll just add one more thing there. Part of that, the result of that effective coaching is this increased self-awareness that the team members have. And when they have that self-awareness throughout the days, throughout the year, when it comes time to fill out their assessment for their performance review, they have that awareness to say, okay, I know I'm really good in this area, and I know I need to grow in this area. So having those coaching conversations and creating the self-awareness really feeds in nicely to the actual performance assessment, that has to happen.
Absolutely.
To add to that, I think that just to add to that, I think that at the end of the day, having a simple process and forms around the performance review itself that frame the conversation around strengths and improvement areas, and kind of taking that into a growth plan is also key to making sure we create the right mindset in our employees.
How can HR mentor managers to mitigate bias during performance evaluations? Gilly, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So bias is something that we have, a lot of us, and it's something that's hard. It's hard to not have when we deal with interpersonal relationships. However, it is possible to manage it, and by being aware that we may have certain biases, we can actually do things to mitigate them. So, for example, if we have a bias about someone who just did something phenomenal, and so we go into our performance review and we say, oh, they just did something great, so now I'm just going to give them the best performance review. But in order to knowing that in advance, we're able to plan and say, okay, let me think backwards. Let me think about all examples of all the things that this person did. Same thing if someone did just did something not as great at work, and we go into the session, the performance review really upset with them, right? By knowing that we have a potential for these types of biases, we're able to plan in advance and prepare. And one of the biggest tips I give managers as they're preparing to have performance evaluations is to prepare in advance, right? To go into your conversation thinking about who's the person I'm going to be talking to, what are the things that may come up, and doing that preparation and thinking about potential biases as well is really helpful to manage them.
Victoria, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so to build upon that as well, biases, I think everyone have biases. And there's actually really good Harvard resources. I can share it in the chat. It's a test, that's self-evaluation of how much bias you have. And it really, everyone that I know that took it had some kind of biases towards one thing above the other. You can check different types of biases, like unconscious biases, conscious biases, biases for language, for race, for colors. And we all have it in a way because we all come with our background, with our baggage, with depending on where we grew, what environment, our life experience. So we all carry that. So it's really difficult, right? When we conduct performance reviews to kind of put that aside and really focus on the person. And actually now I'm also working on some trainings of how to mitigate biases when you interview people. So it's the same when you have job interviews. How can you put that aside? So exactly what Adi said is that we need to work backwards and think about, is our evaluation objective or not? Why am I thinking that way that I'm thinking? What are the facts that support what I'm saying? And really stick to the facts and try to be the most objective as you can. You can also count on your HR or your peers to see if they have the same impression, if they could share the same review about the person or not, to see if you're not the only person that says it. So test your opinion against other people's opinions. And don't be afraid to reach out to HRs, really, because they're there for that. The HR, and not only HR, also diversity inclusion representative if the company has. So really, they're there for that. So don't be afraid to be proactive and use them also as a resource to assess your opinions, if they're objective or not.
And one other thing that made me think is when we're giving feedback, it's really encouraged to focus on behaviors, not the personality or the characteristic of the person. So when we give someone feedback about how they're performing and we're focused on their objective behaviors, how they behave with colleagues, with customers, or in a meeting, and we're able to give the feedback around that behavior and the impact that it has on the business or on the team, it helps us when we're trying to get away from being biased, because we're really focused on objective facts and behavior, as Victoria mentioned.
Thank you both. How often should you run a performance review? I know that all companies are different in terms of how many times they do this a year, and it's probably a constant process, but what do you think is ideal for a company to be doing in this respect, Yuli?
So as we've mentioned, ideally, there should be ongoing feedback, right? Feedback, assessing performance, talking about growth should be a weekly thing, a monthly thing. That said, I know that there is formal processes that happen in the company. And, if a company is able to do this on a quarterly basis or on a half-yearly basis, that would really, really be ideal. We want the feedback to be fresh in their mind, to think about if you're getting assessed in December on something you did in February, there's a little bit of a disconnect. So we really want these performance reviews to happen as frequently as is possible within the organizational infrastructure. So ideally, if a company can manage doing these formal sessions quarterly or half yearly, is recommended.
Adi, do you have anything to add about, kind of what we do at Bob and what you feel is useful in terms of performance management review cycles with your teams?
I can say that what I've seen work for our customers is while they work in a semi-annual process of performance review, the ongoing process of setting goals as a result of that performance review and continuously doing check-ins on those goals within Bob, of course, that supports that. That is a great balance between the ongoing check-in and feedback that we provide to our employees while there is a formal process happening within that happens twice a year.
Thank you. How can you make sure the managers with remote and in-person teams treat the review process the same way? I know this is on a lot of people's minds for how to be fair and how to deliver good news and bad news for your team respectfully the same way you would, throughout the team. Victoria, do you want to give us some insight here?
Yeah, well, I think one of the best practices is to have a tool that facilitates performance reviews and collect those 360 reviews from the manager, the peers, the direct reports, and asking the person to evaluate their own performance and assess the other people's reviews against the person's own performance. So that could be a way to do it. So in a nutshell, it's to have a structure that if you have that structure, it will enable you to be fair for the people that work remotely and the people that work in person. If you use this kind of a tool and a system and a process, setting up specific deadlines to collect this feedback, analyzing and reviewing it, assessing it against the people's own feedback. Have structured questions, something very, very specific. Don't be vague in your questions. Don't just ask, what are your growth opportunities? But be more specific. Give people maybe some multiple choices, but also a space where they can write their own kind of open forum where they can write their own feedback and what can be improved. Assess it also with the employees' goals. Like Adi said, if you have set goals for the person, how do you assess their performance and their peers' evaluation against the set goals you set for them previously? So all that, like the more structure and systems you have in place, the more it will enable you to be fair in that process and have kind of equal treatment for approach for your employees.
Another thing that I think is critical here is messaging from leadership and from the organization as a whole. Something that makes the review process a success is to have really strong messaging that's not only coming for your email to complete the form, but really strong messaging that leaders are saying over and over about how important this is, that leaders are walking the talk, that leaders are taking this really seriously and role modeling for their team members how important this is and how they should treat this process. So by making sure that within that messaging and within the things that are coming out of HR and leadership, we're telling the people that, regardless of whether you're in person or remote, this is still just as important. This is still just as effective. That's really important as well, to make sure that everyone feels that they're on the same page and getting equally communicated with.
Yeah, I think those are really valid points, because, you might see someone in person more often and be more inclined to be more verbal with them about how they're doing, and having technology to actually make sure you're putting all this information, keeping track, especially when you have a larger team, is really important. How do you assess successful leadership performance? Victoria, do you have some insights on this?
That's the $1 million question. How do you assess successful leadership performance? We can have another webinar just dedicated to that question. So what can I say in a couple of seconds is yes, definitely according to feedback, performance reviews, performance evaluation of the peers, the performance of the team as well. How open they are themselves to coaching, to growth mindset, how they foster that within their teams, what they dedicate to diversity and inclusion as well. I know that prior to this webinar, we met and we talked about it, that lots of companies, they evaluate people's performance against their goals. Just kind of, did you do your job correctly or not? Did you do it well or not? And they don't look at the leadership aspect. Do you have this kind of leadership? Do you lead successfully your teams? Do you manage successfully conflicts? Do you manage and implement change in the right manner? Do you coach your teams and help them grow? And all those other aspects that we have, like, how do you build trust with your stakeholders? How do you become innovative, etc.? So all those leadership behaviors that many companies overlook when they conduct performance reviews. And I think that they should be these every company, small or big. Well, I know at Amazon we have our 14 leadership principles that everybody swears. Some people have it even tattooed on their shoulders. It's something people live and swear by. So every company should define. It's like they define their company values and mission. They also have to define what successful leadership looks like within the company, and assess that, use that also as a tool when they conduct the performance review, and really look at what it looks like in early stages, first-time leadership, first-time managers, mid-level managers, and senior managers. What are the expectations of those behaviors? What are the expectations of those competencies in each level and each stage of people's careers? And use that also as a tool when we evaluate leaders' performance.
That's super helpful. Yeah, and I think also, being able to gauge their own leadership development, and if they're putting time into themselves, is super important within an organization, because sometimes you're so busy, taking care of everyone else, we forget about ourselves. So I think that's also a super important benchmark for leadership. How do you empower growth and development without a physical office environment? Adi, do you want to take this one?
That's an interesting one. So, of course, it's always a bit of a challenge running the same programs we used to run when our leaders are remote and when our people are remote. At the end of the day, those performance reviews serve as a platform for us to identify and provide the means for the team to grow by building a specific plan for each employee, and then taking from that plan what are the kind of programs that we need to run, even if they're remote and online courses or what have you. And we've been doing that at Bob recently and creating those programs where we identified project managers need some skill set that need realignment and so on. I think that the importance of realignment and setting clear playbooks to what we do is even more critical. And of course, development of leadership and so on. So all of that, same programs we used in the past, but in a slightly different format would apply to how we work today.
And there also is some benefit to not having the physical office, because you're able to maybe connect more people within their growth and development than you would usually be able to if you were just confined to one space.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I wanted to say as well. I do a ton of manager trainings with companies, and what's been really unique about this experience of doing these trainings remotely is that I have people in the class from 3 different continents, right? And people are able to connect with one another with similar skill levels and similar roles in the organization that they otherwise would not have been able to learn from each other in these types of situations. So I actually think that there are some of those benefits of doing these types of things because of the connection that we can make virtually with some people who we don't normally see in the office.
What would you say is the most important thing to remember when giving feedback remotely? This question has come up a lot because, you know, it's hard to they always say have a tough conversation in person, right? The easy ones, you're doing wonderful are, that's maybe a little bit less challenging to do remote. But what do you think about this one, Gilly?
So when it comes to giving feedback remotely, as I mentioned before, we have to take everything we know about giving feedback effectively and kind of overdo it, right? We want to over communicate. We want to listen even more deeply. We want to give them even more space to respond because we can't see their body language or their nonverbal cues. That said, everything else we do should really be kind of those same best practices, like having the conversation with empathy, with that listening, with asking open-ended questions, with giving them space to respond, focusing on behaviors and impact, things like that we really want to be doing across the board wherever we are, but even more making sure that we're even more prepared and even more focused on those things when we're doing it in front of a screen.
Victoria, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I would add to that is that, right, when we deliver feedback in person, we could see the people's reaction directly, and we could, for example, we finish the performance review, we go back to our chairs, we continue working, and we're able to see if it's in an open space or run into that person later on that day or the day after and see how they are, and kind of it naturally happens. When we provide feedback remotely, we don't have that natural aspect of running into the person and just being able to lift your head above your screen and see how they are. So we have to make sure that we not only, of course, over communicate, definitely agree with Gilly, is that we follow up afterwards, seeing, especially if it was constructive feedback that we got, is to follow up with the person, see how they are, how they're feeling, give them space also to express themselves, because it's not a one-way communication, it's a two-way communication. We have to create that space. Sometimes a lot of people are processors, so they need time to digest what they heard. And giving them that maybe a few days or a few hours or the week after, follow up with them again and saying if they have any other things to add to that or to say to that, and think about the next steps moving forward. So I would say it's being proactive. That's if we want to summarize it in one word, be proactive, like communicate, over communicate, create the space and follow up.
The other thing that just came to mind as you were talking is I've noticed that when we have virtual conversations, regardless of the type of conversations, we tend to kind of, be really task focused, right? Okay, we have 30 minutes together now. Let's go through our agenda. And when we have a feedback conversation, we want to also allow for that more dialogue, that more casual or that more spontaneity. And so we have to maybe come with our intent for the conversation to allow for that space, to be okay with silence. Some people take longer to process, as we've been saying. So really get out of the mode of boom, boom, boom. Let's get this meeting over with, and be more in that, because when we're in person, it's easier. We chit chat and we're a little bit more maybe. Can be in like more of a relaxed state. So when doing it remotely, really coming into the session with that intent of we're here to have this dialogue and two-way conversation.
Adi, do you have anything to add?
No, I think those are the main things. As long as we make it very actionable and then proactively check in on that, that will serve the purpose of making sure this is effective.
Okay, maybe you could help out a little bit with this one. So how should you use tech for your performance management?
I'd love to take that one, because I feel like the way we've embraced this process within the organization and the way we preach our clients to work with Bob to be able to support this process has been incredibly helpful. And it starts, as we said, with a structured performance review cycle that includes the self-evaluation and then the manager evaluation, where you can kind of look at the forms side by side while you are running the conversation as a manager with your employees. It goes to building those actionable goals into the goals module and being able to follow up on that and create check-ins as you go. And as a whole, the engagement piece is critical for this process as well as other processes within the organization. So making sure, we create the right shout outs around it and the right messaging around that would all lead to a very successful process. If I may add another piece of that, you talked about how do we assess successful leadership? And one of the tools we're using to do that is through an engagement survey that is always also something we do in Bob, where we evaluate the employee experience. And I think that's key to assess our leadership success.
Thank you. Do you have any insights you'd like to add here, Gilly?
When talking about tech, I think in addition to the system like Bob, there's the platform that we use to have the conversations, and that would be any sort of video platform. And what's really important when we're doing this remotely is, as simple as this sounds, turn on your camera, because when you all know from this time of virtual meetings, when you're in a meeting with someone and their camera is off, they are probably doing something other than listening to you. And even if they're not, you assume that. So important when you're having these really important conversations to have your camera on, so that the person can look you in the eyes and see that you are truly focused and invested in the conversation that you're having with them.
Yeah, I think that is a key tech tool that you should make sure to use properly when you're having these kind of conversations for sure. And I think what's really important also with using performance management tools is you have a benchmark. I mean, we all have so many things going on that we won't remember where we're trying to go if we don't remember what has happened and track that. So I think it's super important that you, even if you haven't been good at it in the past, you need to start somewhere. So I wanted to go into some of the other benefits, and we've discussed some of these, but you need a platform where employees and managers can access their history to figure out like where they've come and the feedback, the constructive feedback that they had. Maybe instead of repeating conversations that they had in the past, they can look back to see where they need to improve and stay on track with their goals and where they're trying to move towards that promotion, what's going to help them to get there. It's super important. Saving time for your team. If your team is growing and your team like is dispersed all throughout the world, you want to make sure that you have technology that can grow with you and allow you to automate your workflows, even when it comes to performance reviews, and triggering reminders and follow-ups to do these things, get them on time, and make sure that your team gets the message across and has targets to follow, especially when they're all different in terms of hybrid work and different types of employees, if they're contract, remote, flexible employees. Creating global consistency in the remote review process or hybrid review process when it comes to reporting, KPIs. When you have teams all over the world, this is super important as well. And being able to have a format to track their compensation management, compensation goals in the future. Setting those reminders so you're able, especially if you have larger teams, to make sure that they're participating and taking their part in the review process and that everything's completed on time. And of course, using surveys for better communication and collaboration, especially when some of the employees aren't in the office and you can't gauge exactly how they're feeling all the time, even after the performance review, if they don't feel like something was on target or completely accurate in their performance reviews. Using surveys before and after and continuously through the year is super important. So we just covered these slightly, but within our system, this is kind of one of the many ways that you can review. You can have a peer review within Bob. So teams that are not directly even working with each other can review each other's performance and give feedback and constructive feedback, as well as your self-reviews. This is what we were talking about, where the employee has to really focus on their how they've been performing and where they'd like to see growth and what their career trajectory could be like within the company. And we make it super easy where they're even able to use a scale, multiple choice, free text. And then also self-review and manager review. So this can give you a kind of view of how your employee is feeling themselves, and then how, where you'd like to take that to give them some constructive feedback on what your view is of their performance. So it looks like we have some questions that have come in, and if we don't get to all of them today, please know that our panel will give us the answers and we'll make sure to get them to you privately. What are some things to avoid when conducting a performance review? This is probably a big one. Top things to avoid. Gilly, go.
Top things to avoid. So focusing on the person's personality or character rather than their behaviors, right? Giving subjective feedback rather than objective feedback. Not having your camera turned on or being distracted, being in a place with loud noises in the background. Don't do that. Those are two things that come to mind.
Anyone got some top tips on what not to do? Victoria?
Yeah, I just remember a funny story that my first performance review was the worst performance review of my life. And I was in a consulting company and I had a manager that just just said like everything I did wrong, and it all came from as a surprise to me because I haven't heard that before. So because it wasn't ongoing, it was in the end of the year. I didn't know, I didn't get any feedback before about my work, and I was fresh out of university and excited and eager, and I thought that I can be the queen of the world, and of course I wasn't. But that feedback really, really kind of traumatized me, I guess, and made me realize also how important it is to enable managers to conduct effective feedback, or beyond that, become good leaders. So, so things to avoid is that it shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people. They should be already aware of some of their opportunities for growth or their strengths, because feedback should be ongoing and not just once a year. Also, that manager, she focused on, she told me, you have such a high opinion of yourself. And it was completely her personal interpretation of me, because I was doubting. I was, it was my first job out of college. I was doubting everything I was doing. It was, should I write this email to that person? Should I formulate it this way? Should I do it that way? And it was completely wrong. And it's also, it shows like how you can like look back at yourself and think about, is that your interpretation of the person, or is that really relates to the person's behavior or not? So really kind of test yourself against that. So another thing to avoid is to be very factual and have arguments that support your ideas. So if you said that you have opportunities for improvement, you have to explain the why. You have to give examples of what happened in the past that support your argument. And and as Gilly also said, like, don't be distracted by other things. Like show respect, give people space to reply and to tell their own story and their side, and really use that also as an opportunity to have a career conversation. Because maybe some people are not good for one role, but they're going to be great in another role. So talk about what their ambitions, what they want to do. If you prepare them for promotion, what are some actions that they need to do to become at that level, to be ready for the promotion, etc. So make it positive. So these are the things that came to my mind.
One other thing that I wanted to say about things to avoid, avoid not following up. So in positive terms, follow up, right? We want to make sure that these conversations are not just you have them and put them away. That's what having them in a system like Bob is really helpful, because you have a history and you can always refer back to them. So always follow up. If the person has a growth opportunity or a goal they're working towards, check in on it. Make sure that it doesn't get lost in the mix of going back to everyday work.
Thank you. So another question we had can't come in is, should you use the same 360 feedback process for all management levels within your organization? So if you have, I assume they're looking more towards like the senior, maybe exec team, do you do the same process for feedback with all levels of the management team? Adi, what do you think about this one?
So I'm guessing there needs to be a level of different questions you ask around executive leadership versus those first-line managers, and that's very important to make sure that those are aligned, with the values and with the different level of engagement or expectations from these different levels as well. So I would go with that, but I'd really love to hear Gilly's opinion and Victoria's on that one from a professional point of view.
Yeah, so I can jump in. So I think that. Oh, sorry. I think the process itself, the 360 process of collecting feedback from around the organization, should be the same no matter what, because everyone has that innate need to get feedback, to understand about themselves and their strength and growth. But like Adi is saying, what we measure them on, what we assess them on would be different. There are if you have those leadership competencies or behaviors that are different by the different roles within your organization. So you would be assessing on different expectations, but the process should generally be the same.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it should definitely be 360 for all of the type of the leaders, and it also depends on the company itself, on the size of the company, on the business model, on the business of the company. So, of course, like first line, for example, salespeople or customer support leaders are not going to be assessed as the same way as a CMO or COO or etc. As a C-level suite, because they're going to be less operational. So they're going to be more assessed on the strategy and the results of their organization. But overall, yes, I also agree that it should be similar idea of collecting feedback from different layers around them to assess their performance. Definitely.
Thank you. And then we have a metrics question. So what type of metrics should you measure with 360-degree feedback? So I think it would be helpful for me as well to understand what type of metrics you can get from this data. Gaylee, do you have some insights into this from your clients that you've worked with in the past?
Yeah, so I think this is getting at like, what are we actually measuring, right? How can we get a measurement through giving feedback? And again, I think the metrics here could be, each company is different. Each company has different values, different competencies, different things that are important for their culture and for their leaders. So I've had clients create, have their own competencies for what it means to be successful at each level of the organization. And then you're measuring them, ranking them or whatnot on those competencies. So you can do a ranking system in that way to measure and provide metrics on those specific competencies. So that's generally how that can be used, and that's so different for each company, because each company has obviously a different purpose, different values, and different idea of what it means to be an effective leader within their culture.
Thank you. Victoria, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I can add to that is that I agree that we really need to see what exactly we're measuring to find the best tool and means to measure that. I can say from my experience, from leadership development perspective, we always use different mechanisms to measure successful leadership. So, for example, if they went through a training or a specific change within the organization, so we want to measure their behavior before the training versus after the training, how they evaluate themselves, their own strengths and understanding of different leadership behaviors and confidence to apply what they learned before plus after. We can ask for their manager feedback on if there was some kind of a behavior change. We can look at the engagement surveys in terms of the whole business. So I see that also the tool Bob does that. We can look at D&I data as well, look at the number of underrepresented population, how present they are in the company, look at HR data, attrition rate, time enrolled, time before promotion, how many people were promoted, and attendance, and also finally, of course, at the business results itself. So if there is healthy metrics within the other aspects that I said, it will contribute to, of course, healthy metrics in terms of business results, like looking at the KPIs, profitability, how we are against our OKRs, etc. So it all really depends. It's all intercorrelated. That's what I want to say.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing. We don't have time for all the questions today, but like I said, we will come back to anybody that has questions left and make sure that we get your answers. And thank you so much to our wonderful panel for participating. We're so happy that you were able to spend this time with us, and we're looking forward to staying in touch for the future and having you again. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
so much.
Bye.